in my eyes, is overseen, in pretty much everything we do, whether we are interested in, understanding better who we are, whether we follow a job, whether we are in a relationship with anyone. There's one thing that we usually oversee a lot, and that is that we believe that everything is happening to us. And to us means that there's a separate entity, something separate from everything else, and that's basically ruling our everyday life. We that way we are not able to deal with emotions. We are constantly hoping for a better future. We are feeling guilty about the past. We think we could miss out on something. We make up stories in our heads about the future that will never happen, positive and negative. And so we're constantly drawn between the past and the future, and the past and the future. And why is that? Is because we put all our trust in a funny system, which, let's call it here the thought system, which we believe we have everything to do with, and which is basically almost like a guru that tells us what we should do and what we should not do. And the only reason why we're interested in that thought system and that guru is because we think it's about us what this guru says, and we think it's even from us what this voice is telling us. And that's the only reason why we're interested in the first place. So what we're speaking about here is not about mindfulness. It's not about trying to calm our mind. It's not about dealing with emotions. It's not about even, healing or energy or anything like this. What we're saying is that everything that's happening in this world, in the so-called world, has nothing to do with what we are. There's this let's say you could see that you are like, or we are like an onion, right? And there's this many layers that we identify ourselves with. I just saw that you cannot connect to Zoom, so yeah, you can also be here. And that we are like an onion, and we identify with so many layers. And one of the layers, it can be, the earliest identification is probably, when the human body is born, I still think the scientists, even they say up to 1.5 years or 2 years, there's no sense of self yet. There's no sense of separation or identity. So that means it's not a given what we identify with, but it's an acquired thing that comes after some time. So the first identification that we have is something like, sort of the sense of self, which comes after 2 years. We're like, oh, I'm this, ego, or I'm this Benjamin. Then there's a sense of self or an identification with the family. When somebody would say something bad about maybe your mother or your father or your brother, you would defend them. Like, you would justify their behavior, you would defend them. And even like I heard stories, where people got abused by their parents, and little children, they wouldn't, obviously they wouldn't call upon them because they feel like one with them. So it's an identification. So family is an identification. Where we come from, the city we come from is an identification. There are so many villages or different groups of people that argue against each other, one village against the other. There's football clubs. There is friend circles. You identify with a certain friend circle. You identify with your profession. You identify with your girlfriend, with your boyfriend. You identify with your career. You identify with money, how much money you have, how much you don't have. You identify with how you look. You identify with your color of your skin. You identify with, and so on and so on. It goes on and on. And as soon as we're identified with something that's in this world, there will be suffering or conflict happening by default. Why is that? Because everything that's sort of appearing in this world has a start and an end. It appears and disappears, and it changes. So, and in a way, in a funny way, we're holding on to many things that are happening, and we want them to stay the same, we want to change, we want that they change. And it's a constant, you could summarize the dilemma as, this is the perfect picture I have about the world and about my relationships and about myself and about everything, and this is what's actually happening. So there's always this discrepancy between what I think it should be and what's actually happening. And the more I have a very clear idea of how it should be, the more frustrating it is. It's a very simple principle. So if like peace at the end of the day means I'm in peace with what is. Because, and there's one big thing is, when I'm identified with stuff in the world, with the matter, with the body, mind, with thoughts, with emotions, with my career and everything, then I would take that statement and be like, oh my God, that sounds so scary. I'm in peace with what is. I cannot be that. I have to constantly want more and so on. No, but when you realize that you're none of this onion that I just talked about, all these layers, when you realize you're none of those, then it's basically the easiest thing to be in peace with what is, because from a certainty that you're none of these things. The only interest you have in changing the world, including this thing here, Benjamin or whoever is there, when we want to change anything in the world, that means we have a lot of interest in it, and that means we're in a way vulnerable to be hurt. We're like, basically that's the step into the world. And then of course, then we cannot complain about, ups and downs and being depressed and struggle and suffering, because we entered a place which is defined by default by change and by success, failure, by ups and downs. So this approach, or it's not an approach, but what I'm talking about here is not a giving up, it's not a surrendering on some level, but it's basically seeing that what you are, or actually what you're not, basically seeing what you're not, and by seeing what you're not, you lose all the interest in it. So if I'm, usually what we do is, let's say I feel agitated, I worry so much about the future, and I feel guilty about the past. Many times, most of us, we don't even catch that. We just think it's sort of part of the game. Right? We worry a lot, and then we look at other people and think, oh yeah, they probably also worry a lot. So sometimes we think they worry even more. Sometimes we think we're the only ones worrying. But that's sort of what calms us down. But what we're saying here is it's not about calming our thoughts when we worry a lot. But what I'm saying, it's much more radical, much more freeing as well, is to realize that that we have nothing to do with any of this. And it sounds like, to the body mind, it sounds like an escape, but to what you already are, the screen in this analogy, it's pure freedom, it's pure bliss. And many times, when I also do coachings, I get the point of, but if I'm so detached from everything, then I don't feel any emotions, and then I can also not enjoy life. But you would only say that, that's a thought that comes from the mind, and we would only listen to that thought when we don't know what the other side looks like. It's like what I'm describing here from my experience, because I have also experienced the other contrast. What I'm describing, it's a bit like anti-gravity, so we are all under the influence of gravity all day long, all the time, everyone. But nobody speaks about it, right? You go to a cafe, nobody speaks about, oh my God, you feel that gravity, it's pulling me down, right? Or you go on a hike, and then, it's not the hill that's so exhausting to go up, but it's gravity pulling you down. But nobody's saying, oh my God, look at this gravity today, what it's doing. And it's the same way with this. So the let's say level of freedom that we are used to in everyday life is so low that we think, if we navigate in like a very low level of freedom, we think when we're a bit higher, we feel so free. But what we're talking about here is, in a way, is that what we are, it's not like one day you will reach that freedom. It's like right now, we are that freedom right now. It's like the highest freedom you can imagine. And when you understand this freedom, you would just laugh at this freedom that we take ourselves to have sometimes. So it's the same with anti-gravity. You can only understand gravity when you have experienced anti-gravity. So if you were in space before, then you would understand the effects of gravity. When you're always under the influence of gravity, you don't know the effect of gravity. So it's the same thing here. When you're always under the influence of sort of being imprisoned in your own thoughts, then you don't understand what true freedom is. And we're speaking about true freedom here. It's the most radical form. And it's not something that, as I said, one day you will be able to attain, but it's the freedom that's there right now. So it's not like that in a way that we have to go out and free everyone, but it's more like that there's freedom everywhere. And in a way, it's just showing people that there's some kind of imprisonment happening constantly on their own. We just have to show this mechanism and see what's happening. And that's all. So we don't have to look for freedom, because the moment we would be looking for freedom, it would mean that we would buy into the idea right now that we are not free. And that itself puts us on the hamster wheel that we speak about. You see, it's very important to see. If I am thinking one day I'll be liberated, one day I will be free, by doing that, we are overlooking that there is a belief right now that I'm not free. And that's the only thing that keeps us from being free. It's like, it's a funny thing, but you know, it's important to see that mechanism. It's like the story I always give, two stories. One is, hey, I can show you how to get into the moment. Like, let's do a retreat. I'll write a book and I'll show you how to really get into the moment, you know? And you would read the book and you'd be like, oh shit, I didn't understand it properly. I'm still not in the moment. But the point is that by wanting to be in the moment and being more present, you are you're making an assumption, a presupposed assumption that you are not free. You are not in the moment right now. And that's what's keeping you. You're building like some kind of really weird mechanism there, that you want to be in the moment, and you're assuming, you're presupposing, by doing that, you're presupposing that right now you're not in the moment. So the problem of this is not that you won't be able to reach or get into the moment, but the challenge here, the dilemma is that you're creating this presupposing that you're not in the moment. That's all. So instead of looking after this presupposing what's happening, you're looking at this presupposing, and the solution is right there. The solution is always prior to this whole story that you're making up afterwards. Here's this question on Instagram. If everything is the formless, then how can we see what we are not? If everything is the formless, then how can we see what we're not? So I think the answer is in the question. So if everything is the formless, how can we see that we're not? So yeah, what we are is the formless, right? It's the screen. And the screen in this analogy would be needed in order for anything to appear and disappear. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to appear and disappear. So the appearances of objects is dependent on the screen. And that's the ultimate reality. The only reality there is the screen. And those objects, those seeming objects that are appearing, they are what we are not. They are appearances, right? And in order to be aware or to know what's happening, there's the awareness, which is an attribute of the screen. And only because what we are is the formless, and everything else you can perceive is the form. So you have to be different from what you're perceiving, and that's why you're able to see what you're not. So, you know, there's the saying that what's perceiving cannot be perceived. So that means, so we can play this right now. You can see, so what's perceiving cannot be perceived. That means what can be perceived is not what you are. That means everything that is perceivable, so you can see, you can touch, you can smell, and so on, is not what you are. That means this table, this camera, the wall, everything that you see, and including, which most of us, we usually forget, is this body mind, this voice, the thoughts, the emotions, energy, that you can all perceive. That means, it's like this example, if your tongue was made of salt and I put salt on your tongue, you would not be able to taste it because it's the same and the same. So what you are has to be different from this, what is appearing. And you don't have to believe me or trust me, because you can just use your own experience and you can see it. It's right now happening for, for formulas and the form right now for everyone. It's not something that one day maybe you can achieve. Here's another one. Do you engage in any kind of spiritual practice? How would you reconcile participating in spirituality if everything in appearance is illusory? That's a very good question. Me personally, I don't engage in any spiritual practice. I used to, but once I used to, until the point when I realized that I have nothing to do with this body mind. And I would say, obviously, so it's very important to see, and many times in spirituality, I see this confusion of levels. And I think it's really important to go into that. Because let's take those two, the form and the formless, right? The formless is the screen and the form is everything appearing. So many times when we speak about spirituality, we think that subtle energy, healing, insights, some enlightenments or anything like this, we sometimes believe that that's who we are and that's the formless, and everything else, like everyday life and everything, is the form. But I would go, one level deeper and say, no, any kind of sensation, any kind of even subtle energy, even healing and everything, every spiritual practice is part of the form. And that's important to understand, because it's not something better than chasing money or anything. Because many people I see that chase spirituality on that certain level, they could also chase money. They would be the same impact at the end of the day, because they make it a thing, you see? And that's important. It's not important so much what you do, whether you, are in spirituality or whether you work for a bank, but I think it's much more to see what you are and what you're not in that. So let's go into that question more. So I don't engage into any spiritual practice. And however, at the same time, it's very important is that there's nothing wrong with spiritual practice. Because many times, when we speak about these things, we say, oh, I'm the formless. So I take myself as the form and I speak about the formless, pretending me as the form is the formless, but that's bullshit. So what's happening in actuality is all this form, the movie is happening, this action figure is doing many, many things. Even it could be spiritual things, it could be non-spiritual things, it could be anything. But it's not about what it's being done, but it's about seeing what you are and what you're not. Because, in spirituality, you have many people, who say, oh, wow, look at this guy. He is so, he's embodying his wisdom so much. Or somebody saying, oh, look, he's smoking, this guru, so he cannot be great, right? But this is not what it's about. It's about seeing that there's those two levels of the becoming process, which is all the form. The form is under constant becoming. It's like the symbolism of the cross, which I sometimes speak about. So the horizontal level is the becoming. So this body mind is fully under the becoming process. It's born, it's going on time, and it's dying at some point, and in between there's a lot of change happening, right? And there's the vertical, which is the being. That's sort of beyond the time. So it's the timeless, it's the spaceless, it's the formless. And so what we are at all times is the formless. And by what's happening in parallel, in any case, not really in parallel, it's sort of an unfolding of the formless, which is happening constantly. And if I use the other analogy, it's basically a movie is happening on the screen, right? And we are the screen. So no matter what movie is being played, whether there's a spiritual movie being played or whether there's a horror movie or a romantic comedy, it has no impact on the screen. So no matter if there's a huge explosion on the screen, it has no impact on the screen because it's within the movie. So nothing can touch the screen, and that's what we are. And you know, sometimes in spirituality, I hear people say, "Oh, but look, I'm this expression of love or unconditional love, and I can embody this wisdom that I am." But if you really strictly look at everything, then everything matter is an expression. It's an unfolding of this unconditional love of the formless. So you know, it's like in Plato's allegory of the cave, where people would sit in the cave chained to the ground, and they would look at the shadows, and they believe that they're speaking about the ultimate, about the absolute, and they're just talking about it. It's just some stories, but it has nothing to do with reality. And that's, you know, what I observe in spirituality a lot. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with spirituality, because there's no better, like, you know, better or worse. It's just what's happening in the movie. So it's very important not to judge that. It's just important at the same time to see what you are and what you're not. Because even like when I was younger and I was engaged in some kind of spirituality, I never felt like it would go somewhere. You know, you will have nice energetic experiences, you would have, I don't know, like even ecstatic experience or whatever, but it never leads to where you are, because you are already there. And this body mind, it went through, you know, many deep spiritual experiences, but I never gave it much attention, because it doesn't feel whole, you know, it doesn't feel ultimate, because there's something else which is. So I hope that answers your question. And one analogy I usually give, and I really like this one, because what usually happens is we're in a mechanism, we're stuck in a mechanism, and we don't see that we're in this mechanism. So when we are in it, we are looking from it. And then crazy things can happen, such as, I give this example a lot. So there's, let's say, many people, let's say, who want to get liberated. They believe, in this analogy, they would believe that they really need to go to Paris. Like once they reach Paris and they're in Paris, they will be liberated. So they will have everything achieved they ever wanted. And the thing is that they are already in Paris. So they are in Paris. And when you see it from the outside, you would be like, what? Are they stupid or crazy? So they are in Paris. They buy all the maps how to get to Paris, like probably from, I don't know, from Los Angeles. They would try to get to Paris from Los Angeles. So they buy all the maps, they buy like private jets, they buy tickets for commercial planes, and get some tour guides and everything. And then before they go, though, they go to meetings of people who claim to have been to Paris before. They read books about it and everything, right? But they are, everything they do, or like where they are in Paris. So when you hear that story from outside, you think, are they completely crazy? When you are in it, you don't see it. And you are sitting in the midst of Paris, maybe under the Eiffel Tower, and you have this urge to go to Paris. And then you speak to the others and say, oh, look at him. He's closer to Paris than this guy and this guy. And this is what's happening, because right now, like we're sitting in paradise. Like there's nothing more beautiful. There's only whatever, like it's even, you can't even speak about it, because every word that you speak about would try to define something which is not able, you cannot define it. And that's what's happening. That's the presence right now for everyone, for everything. And it's by forgetting that this is what's happening, taking ourselves like how Ramana Maharshi says, you know, he says, presupposing the existence of a non-existing thing, which is this body mind being separate from everything else, presupposing the existence of a non-existing thing, so this non-existing thing is a sense of self, and then trying to get salvation for this non-existing thing, it's like trying to go to Paris, isn't that, like, you know, through a means of self-improvement and so on, doesn't that mean that you're actually reinforcing that non-existing thing? How can it bring you salvation? And that's exactly, in one sentence, Ramana Maharshi put it in one sentence like this, that's exactly what's happening. So what you don't need is, you don't need how to, like, you know, I don't know, the 10 steps how to get spiritually enlightened. Hi, Dakini. How to get spiritually enlightened, but just go prior to that, prior to that, prior to that, and see, ask the question, who or what wants to be enlightened? And when you go and when you look at the source of all of this, you will see that there's nobody who's not enlightened. There's nothing at all. And that's so the solution is always prior to that, because you know, I tell you two stories. Before I will look at this question, can you be free of identification? You are free of the identification. There's identification is happening. That's important. You know, when I spoke earlier about the becoming and the being, in the becoming process, identification is happening. That's important to see, because what I see in spirituality is that we try to get out of something that we have never been in, and we try to get into something that we have never been out of. That's the dilemma right there. So identification happens. There's an identification happening, but what you are is never identified with anything. And that we cannot grasp with the mind. So, but you are it, you see it. And from that perspective, which is actually a non-perspective, it's crystal clear. There's you, and then from that perspective, you see the mechanism. That's important. You catch the mechanism of this identification. And before you're sort of trapped in it because you're looking from it, you're looking from the problem at the solution, and you make liberation like a big thing. But when you're looking at the problem from the solution, you know there's no problem. It does not exist. And that's important. So yeah, there's identification. And can you be free? You are always free. You're like the blue sky. There's the clouds, and you're like the blue sky. And no cloud, no thunderstorm, no airplane has ever left a mark in the sky. And that's freedom. That's the only version of freedom. Freedom is not to identify yourself with the body-mind that is born, that dies, that goes through a lot of trauma, a lot of emotions, a lot of, you know, many things, right? The body-mind is not perfect. It's just the body-mind that's on the becoming. But is it possible? Of course, once you have seen what you're not, what's happening is you are basically rooted, you know, in a way, if you want to say like this, you're rooted in the formless, and the formless is sort of expressed in the form like this, you know, in waves. It's like that. But never look at, you know, the others and check whether they're liberated or not, because as soon as you find someone not liberated in this world, that means you are projecting that onto others. You see, you take yourself to be something that's not liberated, and you see that in others. So when you see there's still people that are not liberated, and in spirituality, it's a competition. You see all these people, and you see who is more enlightened and somebody is less enlightened. Even a guru or a teacher, he is not more or less enlightened, because it cannot be. Because if you believe that, then you see yourself as not being enlightened, and that's where the dilemma is. It's not the dilemma in somewhere else. So here's another question. Is there really such a thing as what we truly are, because it's ultimately just an identity? So it depends from where you see that, and that's another dilemma. You know, everything we see, everything we come in experience with, we take as this action figure, as Benjamin. From that point of view, yeah, nothing makes sense, because what it does is it takes everything and it makes an interpretation out of it. So what happens is we actually live an interpretation of life as Benjamin, right? So from that perspective, there's nothing like what we truly are. But there is something what we truly are, and that's always so. That's always there. And you know, I like the sentence which says, "Be what you cannot not be," and that's which cuts through all the bullshit, all the identification that's possible, and that's what you are. Be. So try that right now. So be what you cannot not be. How much effort is involved in that? There's zero effort involved. Is it something that one time you can have and one time you cannot have? No, it's not, because it's be what you cannot not be. It's always so. It's that which never changes. Because usually we want to be what we wish we were, or what one time in the future may happen, or what has happened to someone else. But that doesn't take us anywhere. And so yeah, we can be what we are. It's not just we can be, we are always that. But what happens is, on another layer, in a way, is this mechanism of this becoming process that I described, that we identify something. So it's this presupposing, and it's not something that we do every day consciously. It's like a presupposing, and if there's anything, it's in a way registering that, noting that, and catching that mechanism when it's happening. That's important. And when you catch this mechanism from the outside, then you're free from it. It's like, as I said earlier, you are in Paris, you want to go to Paris because you think you're not in Paris, and then you try everything to go to Paris. When you don't see, when you overlook that you are in Paris, you will try everything to do in Paris. And if somebody comes and says, hey, you're in Paris, what are you doing? Are you crazy? You would just ignore that, because you know for as a certain fact, you believe that you're not in Paris. But the moment you realize you are in Paris, you lose all the interest in your maps, in any kind of, if we put the analogy into spirituality, you would lose all interest in spirituality. You would lose all interest in understanding who you are, because you have seen that you are in Paris. You have seen that what you are is liberated. It's liberation. It's liberating what you are. But what happens is, we know what happens in the spiritual world is exactly that. So if we take the formless and form, or like the movie and the action figure example. So what happens is, like the starting point is you are the screen by default. That's freedom, ultimate freedom. But then what happens is, so your freedom, there's a forgetting happening. So there's the action figure appearing, and the action figure presupposes that it's separate and has an entity on its own, a reality. So, and then from there, it hears about liberation. It can be free, but that's too late. You see, that's where it's too late. And that's where the struggle is. That's where people, go to satsangs, or go to meditate, or go to yoga, or go to retreats, where there's nothing wrong with it, as I said. But we do it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and there's no liberation. Of course not, because it becomes more and more subtle, this wanting to be free. But by wanting to be free, we don't see, we have identified with something that's never free, you see? And that's the dilemma, exactly there. So instead of identifying and believing that's who we are with an action figure, and then wanting to be free, it doesn't go anywhere. But so it's important to see that this identification with this action figure, you have nothing to do with, and that's freedom. So the freedom is prior to everything that's going on. There's no time in this. Time is just, it's important to see, time is just something that is brought into the movie. On the screen is timeless, but time is basically in thoughts. Time is brought here in the form of thoughts. It does not exist. It's man-made, right? Just think about it. Who has discovered time? It's not something people have discovered and be like, oh yeah, this is time. It's something that, we have come up with. And yeah, so it's not like, many times, or I have also believed at some point that we're measuring time. But it's not like we're measuring time. Like somebody came up with the concept of time, and now we're following it. But yeah, it's a practical tool, right? But it has no reality. So yeah. So those two stories that I want to tell. I'm just thinking, yeah, maybe I only tell one story right now. So one story which is I think fundamental, because one of the big reasons, let's say why, or let's say not why, but let's say why. One of the big reasons why we're trapped in this whole hamster wheel, let's say, is because we put all our trust in thoughts. All our trust in thoughts. And for most people, why they want to meditate, in my eyes, is because, thoughts, the nature of thoughts, we have 70,000 thoughts every day. I would say 80 or 90% are complete bullshit. They're about the past, about the future, have nothing to do with anything. And for most of us, we're fully identified with thoughts. It's like this. That's, let's say, who we think we are, and that's thoughts, and it's like this. So that's like, yeah, that's sort of a prison. And if we're looking from that, we're basically trapped. We're basically trapped in thoughts, and the nature of thoughts is to be up and down. It's positive, negative, depending where we are. If you're by the ocean, there's beautiful thoughts. If you're in a city, in a mall, there's not so many beautiful thoughts. So, but it's a roller coaster, right? Thoughts are roller coasters. So what happens when we're like this with thoughts? Our life is a roller coaster with thoughts and emotions. It's very, very obvious. But then there's a time, let's say for some people who have meditated or who have done some yoga or something, or had some kind of insight, we realize that, hey, wow, it's possible to observe thoughts. I'm not just going with the thoughts all the time and I just follow them wherever they are, but it's possible to be different from thoughts. Like the moment you realize there's thoughts happening and you are here observing them, that's already a big kind of freedom you experience. So when you realize that that thoughts are not who you are, it really gets very interesting in a way, because then, like I always give the example, there's a presupposing of this body mind that we think that we are before thoughts, we're the thinker, and we produce thoughts, right? So some people would claim that, I mean, most of us, when we're identified, we would claim and say, yeah, I can think whatever I want. But when you really examine it, you know, after 1 second, you know that you have actually no control over thoughts at all. And why is that? I mean, one simple argument is, if you were fully in control of thoughts, you would be able to think whatever you want all day long. You could decide to think 70,000 thoughts a day. You could decide to think one thought. You could decide not to think anything for 3 weeks in a row. Is that our experience? It's not my experience. It's not anyone's experience I ever met, because thoughts are just coming and going. And yeah, and so what happens is thoughts are coming and going, and then there's a claiming right after. So after thoughts, there's a claim and say, oh, I was the thinker of that thought. Or there's an action happening, I'm the doer of that thought. So that's what's happening. And why is it that we have so much interest in thought? So in order, you see, when you believe you're one with thoughts, your interest will go into calming your thoughts. You'll be like super interested in calming thoughts, right? Because the only way out for you, you think, is, oh yeah, I don't like those thoughts. Some of them are nice, but many of them are not. So the only way to get out of them is to calm them, right? Or have more positive thoughts. So also very trendy, right? Since many years, I only think positive thoughts and I try to avoid all negative thoughts. But guess what? It doesn't help. Because the more I try to avoid negative thoughts, the more I make a thing of thoughts as a whole. So maybe you achieve to, you know, be more positive, but it doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't lead to more freedom, that's for sure. So instead, when you want to find a true solution, let's say, for example, for thoughts, what you do is you see that you're extremely interested in thoughts, and then you understand, or you try to understand, to see why you're interested in thoughts. And when you understand that you are trapped in thoughts because you put all your interest in thoughts, that's where freedom lies. Because freedom is to see, or like, is the moment when you lose all your interest in thoughts. That's freedom. Because as I said again, we have tried so much, no? We have all tried and say, no, I can only think positive and I try to avoid all the negative, but it's not possible. You can maybe have more positive, less, but it doesn't go anywhere. So instead of trying to do that, you lose interest in thoughts. And how can you lose interest in thoughts? You can only lose interest in thoughts when you see that they are not from you and not about you. Otherwise, as long as you believe they are from you and they're about you, you would be super interested in them. That's exactly what's happening. You would become the best disciple to thoughts. And that's what's happening. It's like the guru is sitting right here, and we're like, constantly jumping. It's like, yeah, sort of a monkey in there, and we're just sort of jumping along whatever it tells us. Without that, that's the thing. Its strength comes from us not being aware of that. That's the only reason. Like, imagine, so those 70,000 thoughts. Imagine you, let's say you spoke every single thought out, and you write them down. You give them to someone else. So you give your thoughts to someone else. They would read them. They would be least interested, no matter how horrible or good they are. They would be least interested in those thoughts. But what happens is, on every day you're listening to those thoughts, and they can drive you crazy. So imagine the power the thoughts have is because you give them all the power. So you can sit on a Saturday afternoon, nothing is happening, and those thoughts, they can ruin your hour, your day, your week, I don't know. But you see how much power we're sort of giving thoughts. But when you realize that you have nothing to do with them, they're not from and about you, that's freedom. Because then what happens is, they're just coming and going. They're used, if you want to book a flight, or if you want to, I don't know, go somewhere, you use them in a way as an instrument, and that's it. It's a very natural thing. It's like drinking a glass of water when you're thirsty. It's like that. It's very simple. And so in regard with that, I want to tell a story. So the story is, I told it a few times already, but it's so powerful in my eyes. So the story is, and it's a real story from nature. So there's a mushroom family in nature called cordyceps. And the only way for them to reproduce, it's a very rare kind of mushroom. And the only way for them to reproduce is that they spit out spores. And since the other mushroom families are quite far away, they would spit out a spore. The spore would hack into the brain of the ant, like a little ant, and it would use the ant as a means of transportation to go to the other mushroom family in the forest. And once it reaches this other mushroom family, so it would tell the ant to go there without the ant wanting to do it, obviously, but the ant thinks it wants to go there because it's hacked. And then it reaches the other mushroom family, and then the other spore from the other mushroom comes, and out of sort of the magic happens, and then a mushroom grows out of the brain from the ant. So that's what's happening in nature every day. And I love this story so much because this is exactly what's happening to us every day. Meaning, a thought comes, so that's like the spore. It sort of tries to hack our, being or who we are. And it does so, the magic happens. It's like a parasite in a way, like in this example with the cordyceps. So what happens in that moment, the spore enters the brain, and the ant believes all of a sudden that it's mine. It's my thought. So my thought that tries to get me to the next family. And that's exactly what's happening. So in regard to what's happening here in real life, there's thoughts coming, as I said, around 70,000 every day. And what happens is, instead of just seeing them as thoughts, we take them as my thoughts. And that's the only reason why they have all the power. This mine, that makes all the difference. It's like, imagine you write on the wall, you write health, you write money, you write relationships. Like, you don't have, much emotions for that. But when you write my relationships, my money, and my health, you'll be like, oh shit, oh my God, yeah, I know. It gets, really, really tricky and so on. And that's exactly the same. So, yeah. So that's basically the freedom from thoughts, and it's a huge thing. So anyway, here's a few comments. So Simran is saying, thoughts and thoughtlessness have same power. When given, you are in peace with both states. Thoughts and thoughtlessness have same power. When given, you are in peace with both states. I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can rephrase it. But yeah, thoughts and thoughtlessness. I don't know what you mean by thoughtlessness. But yeah, the power, like maybe what you mean is like when there's thoughts happening and we're not aware of them, or we're not aware of the effects they have. Yeah, that then means, it means sort of we don't have any pause button. You know what I'm, when let's say, okay, let's say that's something more practical. Let's say someone is fully identified with thoughts and he thinks, oh, I need to do something really stupid now and go, I don't know, do something really stupid, like what many people do. And then what happens is they just do it, right? They just do it, and something completely inappropriate, they will regret it later, but they will just do it. But let's say when you're able to observe those thoughts, then you can, if let's say a stupid thought comes, say, oh, I have to do this now, and then you're able, it's almost like you establish a pause button that you can hit and then sort of still, and then in a way you have a seeming choice of following that or not. And that's in a way, you know, a strong tool in a way. Then there's a comment, we're controlled by thoughts. Yeah, exactly. So it's important to see that we are controlled by thoughts, and at the same time it's important to see that we are not controlled by thoughts. Meaning, let's say the body mind is under the influence of thoughts, but what we are is never under the influence of anything. That's important to see. But without this, let's say, admitting that we're controlled by thoughts, we would constantly run away from that, and that would actually keep us away from seeing who we truly are. It's a funny thing, you know. But yeah, that's basically describing a bit the dilemma. That's what's happening here in the world every day. So as I always say, you know, there's many great spiritual paths, and you can have many great I don't know, experiences and moments of enlightenment and moments of love and peace and moments of having it and having lost it and also all these things. But the main thing to, in order, yeah, is to come back always to that which is prior, because as I always say, you are the starting point, which is mostly confused, I would say. The starting point of everything is you are free. It's not just you are free, you are freedom. There's nothing more absolute than what you are. That's the starting point, and it's not just the starting point, it's always so. That's important to see. And when we see that, we are immune to everything that's happening. But mostly our starting point is, oh, I am a separate entity that's, you know, separate from everything else, that's independent and everything. And now I need to become one with everything, right? For instance, I need to be liberated. That's where the problem starts, right there. Yeah, so it's basically seeing that what you are does not need to be liberated. And when you're identified with, let's say, when there's an identification with something that is not liberated, it actually never becomes so. That's important to see as well. No matter what you believe, no matter what's happening, as I say, you are the blue sky, right? And no cloud, no airplane has ever left a mark. That's really important to see. Or you are the screen, and it doesn't matter how deep, you know, your hurt is, or how deep your sorrows, or how deep your whatever injuries or whatever is, it has never left a mark on the screen. And it's important not to confuse the two, because many people, like, you know, many people would hear the message, let's say, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. They would hear it as the body mind, and then it doesn't go anywhere. It does not make any sense for the body mind to hear I'm not the body mind. It doesn't make any sense, because the body mind is the body mind. And when you hear this message, I'm not the body mind, as a screen, it's not needed, that message, because the screen is like, yeah, obviously, like, yeah, obviously, right? You're not the body mind. So, and as I said, that's the whole dilemma right there. It's not after the identification with something you're not, but it's always prior. The solution is always prior to everything. And yeah, that's like the story. Maybe I'll tell it in a short version. I told it, I think, in a more detailed version before. But there's like somebody approaches his friend, his best friend, and he says, "Hey, you know what? Your wife is cheating on you," and he's totally out of it. And he's like, "Oh my God, it's impossible. How can that be? She was always so nice to me, and always she had a lot of faith and everything." And then and he gets super concerned, and he's like very agitated, and he's fearful. He doesn't know what to do. Should he approach her? Should he not? So the story goes on and on, right? Like he hears that his wife and her lover, they're gonna meet at midnight at a church, and so he thinks about, should he approach her or not, or should he get divorced or not, and all those kind of things, right? So he's totally lost in his mind. And so you would think, right, that the solution would be somewhere, in doing the right thing, let's say. But in this story, so to cut it short, he would go to the church, he would not find them, and at the end, he's like, after like being super anxious, he would just have some realization and see that he's not married. And I love that story. When I heard that story for the first time, I was saying, that's a ridiculous story. It doesn't make any sense. This guy is stupid. How can he overlook the most obvious thing, right? That's why I thought this story doesn't make any sense, until I realized that that this is like one of the most beautiful stories, because it's exactly like this right now. That we are like liberation. We are freedom at all times. And we are able to forget that on some level and have the strong belief that we are not free. And that's when you are in it, you take it very seriously, and you feel like, oh no, but I have to be really, one day I will really make it. But when you're not in it and you see it, it's just like a cosmic joke, It's like, in a way, I think Alan Watts said it once. He said, "Fools take seriously what the gods made for fun." It's like that. So yeah, it's just from in a way perspective. But what we are is not a perspective. But there are many perspectives. But what we are is not a perspective. It's just the absolute, and it's something you can't argue about. You can't define. You can look for, because what's looking is what you're looking for. That's also, a sentence that summarizes everything you speak about, is what's looking is what you're looking for. So what's looking is what you're looking for. Where we usually stop is not what's looking, but we fall in love with the facilitation of the looking, that body-mind, which is facilitating the looking, and we objectify that. And that's what we fall in love with. It would be the same as if we fell in love with the messenger, right? So let's say you get a love letter from someone, and you love the letter, and instead of writing back to the person who wrote a letter, you would just want to marry the mailman, and that's sort of what we're doing. And then you realize the mailman is not really perfect, and somehow we believe that he could really write nicely, but then the more you get to know him, the more you realize he's not the one who wrote it, but still you already fell in love with him in a way, and maybe you're trying to get out of it, although you're never in it. So yeah, that's basically what we speak about here. Are there any questions? So we usually do these sessions once or twice a week. This week we won't do it on Thursday, so the next time we do it is next week Monday, same time, and that's it. So thank you everyone for listening, and you can always contact me also on Instagram, and that's it. So thank you guys, take care, bye bye.